remember the yesterdays, the poverty that you and me.
By both our authors. My name is Michelle Perry, and I kind of was asked to introduce these wonderful people we're having, so just bear with me. The way I know our first author, Pat Thomas, is the CD Forum had a presentation of him in March, and I took my granddaughter to go. As most of you know who is on Facebook, I'm kind of the Facebook queen, so I seen this thing flash across my wall that said, "Listen, Whitey," and I went, okay, let me read this. So I read a little more, and then I also read it had music and revolutionary music from the Black Panther Party during the times of the 60s and 70s, which is a time that intrigues me. So I went and was blown over by this presentation, and met with Pat, had lunch with him, and asked him, would he mind doing this fundraiser for us? And he so graciously said he would. So you're in for spectacular sounds of music from that time, as well as history. And I just want to thank you all for being here and supporting us. And right now I'm going to let Pat come up and start the show. Let's give him a hand.
Thanks, Michelle. Can everyone hear me if I don't use a microphone? No. No? You want the microphone? Okay. So I'm a little frazzled. I was on a pretty amazing book tour. I drove from here to Los Angeles and back, and did a lot of these types of events. And unfortunately yesterday I was in a car accident in Portland. I had to leave my car behind, get into a rental car, and keep on trucking. So I'm a little PST, post-traumatic stress, or TS. Well, anyway, it's great to be here because we're obviously here in the heart of the Black community in Seattle, and it's just, I'm honored that Michelle asked me to come down here and do this event. And so I want to just talk a little bit about how this whole book came together. I've been working in the music business for about 20 years, reissuing things like Aretha Franklin, Dusty Springfield, and so I've always had a strong interest in music. I'm a music geek. I have, I don't know, 30,000 albums or some crazy amount of stuff. So I moved to Oakland in the year 2000, and I just started casually reading books about the Black Panther Party, and I was lucky enough to befriend several people. I met Bobby Seale and David Hilliard and Elaine Brown, and I just felt like this book needed to be done, something that sort of blended popular culture, the hippie white culture of the 60s, and all this amazing music. So I'm going to sort of give you a little Black Panther, Black Power History 101, and then we're going to move into playing music, because frankly that's really what I'm here to do. I'm not here to do anything else except hopefully play you some amazing things that I've discovered along the way. So obviously on the left is Martin Luther King, and on the right is Stokely Carmichael, and Stokely, of course, was a key member of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And as most people know, SNCC sort of started off inspired by Martin's nonviolent campaign, and Stokely, being a little younger and a little more agitated, started using the phrase Black Power, much to MLK's dismay. But this phrase Black Power resonated especially with a lot of young blacks in America, including Huey Newton. And the thing that amazes me as I started to research the party is Huey and Bobby in 1966 write this 10-point platform, which I call sort of the Declaration of Independence. And Huey's like 22 years old, and I've yet to meet, I've been lecturing at colleges, I just got my BA, I've yet to meet any 22-year-olds who have the intelligence and dynamics that I believe that Huey had. And the other thing is, and I say this really for the benefit of anyone under the age of 40, is that this is a pre-internet era. It's a word-of-mouth thing. So over a course of 3 or 4 years, the word gets out. Aaron Dixon is here tonight, catches word of it, obviously, and he starts a Seattle chapter. And Fred Hampton is in Chicago. And there's people in New York, and eventually it goes around the world. This is Eldridge and Kathleen, and Eldridge is a controversial figure, and I'm not really here to discuss him in detail, except that Eldridge's big mouth was something that, again, helped fuel the party. He caught the attention of the media, and it was those kinds of things that put the Panthers on the map. And yet the thing that I would like to stress about the party is that, you know, they made front page news when they were carrying guns, but the Panthers never made front page news when they were feeding and clothing the community. You know, that got on page 40, if it got anywhere at all. And the legacy of the Panthers, to me, I think there's a book up there that talks about this book here goes through and describes every program that they had, sickle cell testing and driving families to prison so that they could visit their loved ones and that kind of thing. The woman in the middle is Elaine Brown, and Elaine became very inspirational to me. To me, her legacy is a number of things. First of all, she's still incredibly active. She gives amazing lectures on the prison industrial complex. She's very strong in 2012 about prisoners' rights. The other thing is that people always think about the Black Panther Party as being a male-dominated organization, and yet this woman ran the party. She was the chairman of the party from 74 to 77, so it's important to remember that a woman did lead the party at one point. And she was also an incredible singer-songwriter. I'm going to be playing some of her music later. She was even signed to Motown at one point, and that's a story we're going to dive into in a bit. David Hilliard was chief of staff during what I call the glory years of the party. And David is a mercurial figure, but he was generous with his time with me. And we spent a lot of time hanging out. And David was just someone that was great to bounce ideas and things off as I was working on my book. This is obviously Aaron, who'll be speaking with us later. And now we're going to sort of dive into the fun, whoops. Oh yes, the Partridge Family. You may be asking yourselves, what the hell is the Partridge Family doing at this lecture? And this is part of what my book is about. The book is really, part of the book really explores how, you know, the sort of iconic images of the party, whether it's Huey in the wicker chair or the 1968 Olympics and the Black Power salute, and how this started to penetrate not just the white hippie counterculture, but eventually penetrated Hollywood. And so in 1971, you have this ridiculous episode of the Partridge Family where they're driving around the streets of Detroit and they run into Richard Pryor and Lou Gossett. And Richard Pryor and Lou Gossett are running a club that's about to go out of business. And so the Partridge Family says, well, we'll play a gig for you and we'll raise some money. And this episode gets even more ridiculous because what happens is that little Danny Partridge runs into these Black Panthers, obviously actors, and they're playing violins. And that's not to say that a Black Panther wouldn't play a violin, but I would say it's more likely that it would be a trumpet or a saxophone or a traditional jazz instrument. So anyway, this whole episode is here for a little bit of humor and just again to show Hollywood in some way, you know, riding on the coattails of the movement to try to show some sort of radical chic. So now we're going to kind of dive into the good stuff. The Shaheed Quintet were an unknown group of guys in Kansas City. And they came together in about 1969. And this is what we call in the record industry a private press recording. It means that they recorded themselves, they manufactured maybe 500 copies. This thing never really made it out of Kansas City. I was lucky enough to hear it. I tracked down their family and they licensed this to me. And it's just an invitation to Black Power is just a great way for me to start the lecture. And so we're going to listen to track 1 on the CD. So I want to thank everybody for listening to me. My book and CD are back there for sale at much cheaper prices than they would be if you bought them somewhere else. And I believe Aaron's going to come up next. And thanks a lot, everybody. It's been really great.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is homegrown here. And for those of you, I won't get into age, we all know him. I've admired him for years. And the thing is, at 19, he is the co-founder and the captain of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. And I remember being at Franklin when y'all shut it down. And so he's come to tell us a little bit about not only the history of the party here in Seattle and starting in Oakland, but also that he's writing a new book, which should be coming out in May. And I believe you have another book coming on. 2 books now?
Well, I've started on the second.
Okay, so we'll hear about that. Then after Aaron Dixon speaking, we can have a little Q&A with both Pat and Aaron and Dr. Mims. And so look forward to bringing him up and hearing his story. Would you please give a warm welcome to Aaron Dixon?
I wonder if I could. What's going on? There you go. If you can't hear me, let me know, then I'll revert to the microphone. But, well, for any of you who were from that time period, you know that it was a very electrifying time period. But even more importantly, the way that my generation had that strong sense of purpose is because, well, it's for a lot of reasons. One of the things is that we grew up with the oral tradition. And we grew up listening to the stories of our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents. And we were very much connected to history. We were very much connected to slavery. And I lived in a house in Chicago with my great-great-grandmother, who was actually born into slavery. And so I got a chance to spend time with her and just listen to her stories as I listened to the stories of my other relatives. So this is the way that my generation grew up. And then we had to observe the civil rights movement on TV, on the news when it came on, because at that time there were only 4 or 5 news channels, or TV channels, 4, 5, 7, 11. And there were hardly any black people ever on TV. So when the news came on and they were showing what was going on in the South and the Deep South, everybody was at the TV with close attention, watching every single image of Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers and all the civil rights workers, all those young people that went down south. And we watched them get beaten and sprayed and hosed and had German shepherds turned on them. We listened when Bull Connor said that, we got to get rid of these niggers or something to that effect. And so, we watched this almost every day. And, this really began to affect us. And it really began to connect us to our past and connected us with what we had to do, what our purpose was going to be. And that's how we were raised anyway, being, living at that time period when we had this very strong cultural value system. All ethnic communities had a very strong cultural value system. And that cultural value system was basically the same, is that the elders were the most respected elements in the community. and the young people were the most cherished elements in the community. And the families and the community played a role in enforcing those things. So then in 1961, 62, I might be wrong, but we witnessed the first major assassination. And it was assassination of John F. Kennedy, who was somebody that almost most black people felt he was the first person that we had in the White House that was really paying attention to what we were asking for. And him and his brother, thank you, 63. And him and his brother showed that in their practice in enforcing a lot of the things that we wanted to be enforced. And then to have him, watch him be assassinated the way that he was. I remember I was in the 9th grade, and I remember, you know, school getting let out and everybody having to go home, and we watched that on TV over and over and over again. And it was just a few years later that another great person in America was killed. That was Medgar Evers. And Medgar Evers was a giant in the civil rights movement. A lot of people really don't know about Medgar Evers and how powerful he was and how dynamic he was. And he was assassinated in front of his home. And then, you know, a year later, in 1966, Malcolm X is assassinated. So, you know, watching these assassinations, it really affected us. It really affected my generation. It really created a seriousness about us and about our lives. So, so my book, you know, talks a lot about that. It talks a lot about my family history, my ancestral history, and the different roots from slavery that both my families on my mother and father's side traveled out of slavery into Chicago. But by 1968, well, actually it was 1964, 63 when Martin Luther King actually came to Seattle. And I just can't remember the details, but I just know that I knew I had to be there. I was about 12 or 13 years old, and I had an opportunity to march with Martin Luther King from Madison down 23rd Avenue to Cherry Avenue. And it culminated in him giving a speech at Garfield High School. So, you know, I was able to graduate from high school in 1967, just barely. I was fortunate to get a scholarship to the University of Washington, and I found myself out at the University of Washington with about 35 other black students. And I met Larry Gossett, Carl Miller, E.J. Brisker, and others, and we were just in the process of forming the first black student union on campus. And then we got involved in things that were happening in the community. We heard some things that were going on in Franklin, and we decided that we had to organize a demonstration at Franklin High School, because it was, first of all, was a school that had a lot of Asian and African American students, but there weren't any administrators of color. There was only one teacher of color. That was Roberto Maestas, who was a teacher at that time at Franklin High School. So we marched on the school and we closed it down. We ran the principal out of his office. We ran the whole staff out of the whole building, matter of fact, and they left the building to us. And that was our first really small victory. And you know, we felt really good about that we were able to get them to listen to our demands, and eventually they did bring in more people of color to be on the staff, and it was a very joyous moment for us, just a little small moment. About a week later, while I was doing some homework from the University of Washington, there was a knock on the door, and a policeman came to the door and told my mother that he had a warrant for my arrest. I was arrested for unlawful, I can't remember, the word. I was arrested. My brother, Elmer, and Anthony Ware were arrested out of their classroom at Garfield High School. Larry Gossett and Carl Miller were also arrested. And I, along with Larry and Carl, we were taken down to the King County Jail. And so we're sitting there in the jail, you know, trying to figure out how we got down there, because I don't think none of us had ever been to jail before, let alone that old, decrepit King County jail. But, you know, we're sitting there watching the news and just talking and trying to figure out, you know, how are we going to get out of this mess? Then the news comes on, Walter Cronkite comes on, and he begins to announce that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And that was, you know, we were just totally shocked and totally dismayed. But it was even more difficult for us to watch all the response that was beginning to take place around the country and all the riots that began to break out all across the country. And it was hard for us because we wanted to be out there too, raising hell and doing whatever we felt we had to do to show our anger and frustration over what had happened to Martin Luther King. So later on that night, you know, we went back to our little bunks, and I had told myself, I said, you know, as far as I was concerned, nonviolence was over. It was over. I had told myself that from now on that it was going to have to be something more strenuous, something more meaningful than nonviolent. Because if they killed Martin Luther King, a man of peace, a man of love, a man of wisdom, then surely they could kill anybody. They could kill any of us at any time.
Yes, I remember the yesterdays, the poverty that you and me survived. For we tried living